Episode 151 of the RUDIS Wrestling Podcast. A new week, some new news, and before we even get into that, Matt, we haven't really talked about what we're dealing with in terms of this, the stay-at-home, and what are things like in Ohio. We've got a stay-at-home order that's been issued here in Minnesota till May the 4th. May it be with you. Star Wars Day, that'll be a great day to get things out. But, what's it like there for you guys at RUDIS and in the home office there in Ohio?
Well, I think in the state of Ohio, our governor, Mike DeWine, really came out on the front end of this and was very proactive. So, we were stay at home right away as soon as all this started coming out. So it seems like from a country standpoint, it seems like we're almost about 2 weeks ahead of your average state. We're not lifting the no work. I mean, there's essential employees are working all over the state. But we haven't lifted working bans. I think that's coming. But I think the question in Ohio is like, and I'm glad we did, but did we do it too soon? Are we too far ahead of everybody? And what's going to be not the fallout? Because I think any time that people can get back to work and get back to a sense of normalcy, it's a good thing. But I don't know of how many states surrounding Ohio are in the same position we are. But outside of that, the normal homeschool routine, you're getting familiar with that. For me, it wasn't that abnormal because we homeschooled our girls for about 6 years. So it's kind of like getting back on the bike, going back to homeschool. So I don't know if my wife would say that. Yeah, so things are going good. I mean, the things here at RUDIS, I mean, we're plugging along. Obviously, we're down to essential personnel as well. But yeah, I mean, things are going well. All things considered.
We'll dive into the wrestling economy later as the year. Of course, USA Wrestling had announced that that events through the beginning of June have been postponed. I also want to declare that postponed and canceled do not mean the same thing. So let's take an English lesson there, folks. But when we look at what we're going to be talking about today, the NCAA recently announced that the All-Americans were presented. Actually, it's not the NCAA, it's the NWCA released the Division I All-Americans. They'd previously done that with Division II and Division III. When we talk about that today, we've also had some school closings, some programs shuttered, not just my alma mater, Old Dominion University of Cincinnati cut its men's soccer program. We've had loads of cuts at the Division II level involving school closings and things like that. And then we'll also touch on the lightning bolt moment, or the lightning rod moment, probably a better term to use there, last week over on FRL with RUDIS's own Ben Askren kind of inciting a little bit of a riot between Jordan Burroughs and Kyle Dake. So those are the topics we'll touch on today. And first, I want to touch on back with the intro there about the COVID-19 thing. Earlier today, Urbana University in Ohio, as Matt, as you said in the open before we even got recording, is right basically in you guys' back door. That's a Division II institution. It recently announced it was starting a wrestling program a couple years ago. So I think they've had 2 years on the mat, and then boom, this morning I see a link in Twitter. It's sent to me. Boom, the school is closing, taking with it. Looks like they are taking 19 sports programs with them, including that brand new wrestling program. So a lot of people have been talking about wrestling, and when we can come back, there's some situations where there's whole swaths of universities that it's not just their current athletes, but their legacy, their history is just going to be gone.
Yeah, and I actually had the opportunity to shoot a podcast earlier today with executive director of the NWCA, Mike Moyer, and that was one of my questions to him. I said, Mike, I think the questions we're fielding and everywhere, like when are sports, when is wrestling going to come back? I was like, for me, that's trying to get a pulse on the situation. My first question is, how many of these institutions are actually coming back? Because I think, across the domestic landscape, I think there's an assumption that these institutions of higher education make money hand over fist, and a lot of those, and that's not the reality for the majority of these institutions. I mean, when we're looking at just athletic departments and how much financial peril they're in because they didn't get the $6 million payout from the NCAA basketball championship, it's only going to be $2 million. On the surface, you wouldn't think that's a big deal, $2 to $6 million, but that's $6 million. I know at the school I was up at New York, that was half of the operating budget. We operated off a $50 million budget, and getting those millions of dollars from the NCAA was critical to the operation of the athletic department. And then when you look across, institutional wide, when you're thinking about, how many international students are going to come back, how many out-of-state students are actually going to come back to my institution. I mean, there's a lot of financial realities out there that we shouldn't be. Yeah, do we want to get back to normal? Do we want sports to come back? But yeah, our new reality is going to look much different, JB. And I think this is we're just seeing the first of what it looks like potentially could be a lot of unfortunate situations happening across the country.
Yeah, and there's a lot of moving parts to these things. It's not just the finances of March Madness, which was interesting. Is I did a Q&A. I actually finally got Old Dominion to respond to the media inquiry, and after going back and forth with them, and again taking some pretty interesting methods on social media to make my alma mater look bad and to force their hand a little bit, they did answer a 10-question Q&A. Wood Seelig, the athletic director, did, and one of the points it brought up was popularity. And it's like, well, wrestling's popular, the this and that, and I mentioned the amount of fans, and he goes, well, it doesn't generate the revenue like the basketball tournament. Well, I'm sitting here going, and some people were surprised by that. Well, let's look. I talked to the NCAA about it. I go, so wait a minute. So it seemed to me that answer was kind of off-putting or wasn't germane to the discussion of cutting wrestling. Well, no other NCAA championship has a revenue share with the programs. Not Division III, not Division I, not Division II. One championship of the 90 has a revenue share, and that was men's basketball, and we did not get that. So there's the finances associated with that. And if you can manage your money so poorly that you're required, I don't know. I don't even want to go down the rabbit hole of my alma mater right now. But then we look at the tuition driving factors with these smaller schools. Well, you've lost room and board. You've lost all that. Then we can also look at, well, what's going to happen? Like Spartanburg Methodist, for example, they cut men's and women's tennis and they cut wrestling. They don't have anybody to compete against really down there in the junior college ranks with wrestling. Southern Virginia, Southwest Virginia Community College started it. That's not exactly a quick run to wrestle the junior colleges. So we're looking at all these moving parts that come in to determining, are these teams going to be around? Are these schools going to be open? And then we've got 56 sports teams as of right now, as of April 21st, that will not be competing next year. And that doesn't even count Mercyhurst Northeast, which is a junior college that announced they were going to be closing at, I believe last summer. They're going to be merging with the larger Mercyhurst campus, which is a Division II up in Erie. So we're not even counting them as part of this budget crisis, COVID-19 losses. And then we have Boise State, which they suck for dropping wrestling anyway. They put their athletic coaches on furlough, which, yeah, guess what? They're not getting paid. Then we're also looking at what's happening with the Group of Five, what they want to do. They want to minimize or drop the minimum amount of sports to be Division I. And of course, we know Group of Five, meaning the non-Power Five conferences in football. So there are a lot of moving parts that are going to impact a lot of sports. I think men's soccer is really going to feel the pinch just like we do, because you need a lot of space. You need a football-sized pitch to play men's soccer. You need some pretty good. You need that. That's land. That's land you could take up with another building. I mean, that's all sorts of facility upkeep. That's watering grass and things like that. Those outdoor sports actually do cost some money to upkeep, even when they're not being played. So I really feel for all these athletes, not just our wrestlers, that are really going to feel the pinch. And there's so many moving parts, and that Group of Five thing scares the crap out of me. And this is it's not going to be the first. When ODU dropped its wrestling team, yep, they were not going to be the first. Cincinnati men's soccer followed. We've got a Division II in Texas that dropped 6 sports. A Division II in California dropped 12 sports. Again, closing at McMurray, closing at Urbana. Both of those taking wrestling programs with them. So we've lost 5 teams already, with 4 on the men's side and 1 on the women's side. So hopefully the bloodletting will stop. But I mean, we're a month and 3 weeks into April.
Well, I think that's the
56 teams.
Yeah, I think that's the concerning thing, JB, is I think the bloodletting will stop at some point, but the collateral damage is still, we don't know where that's going to end, because we can't forecast the financial futures. I think all these institutions of higher education are trying to get a handle on those things, but it's not as quick. I mean, they're all projections, just kind of like with COVID-19, they're trying to project and forecast what the outbreak is going to look like. But that's a moving part. And I think that's probably the most difficult thing for a lot of these institutions in athletic departments is it's a moving target. It's not stationary, set in front of you where you can dial your scope in and get a good understanding of, everything that's going into it. Like all these administrators are making fluid decisions based on probably partial information and partial projections. And so I don't know where the final fallout, the blood will stop bleeding, but the fallout's going to remain for, who knows how long.
I did tell a couple people this is where you're going to see who your real leaders are. And I'm really specifically talking about Division I. And when I say leaders, I mean the athletic directors that have done a well enough job to anticipate, to budget, to have a reserve, to not sit there and be looking at spending more than you're bringing in. You're going to see who the pretenders are and who the real leadership exists in college sports. And right now, it doesn't exist in Norfolk, Virginia, I can tell you that. But I am curious on where it's going to happen, what programs that will be like, well, I love what the Mountain West said. Like, we don't want to cut sports. Let's dial back our schedule some. Great idea. I don't know how practical it is in a lot of places, but out west things are they look close on the map, but they're not really close geographically in terms of how many miles it takes. But again, who shows through? What schools are going to realize that they hired basically a fraud to lead their departments? That's the one thing that's really going to happen. It's really going to show a lot of people's lack of business acumen. It's going to show through on people who are uninventive in how they solve a crisis. So that's one thing that's going to happen. Now, moving on to COVID-related business, it's the All-Americans as Division III, Division II, and now Division I from the NWCA has announced the All-Americans, and this caused a little bit of a stir, not so much on Division II and Division III, because again, as great and as much time as I love spending with those divisions, they're not really on the focal point of the large college wrestling public as a whole. But when Division I announced that it was going first team All-Americans, second team All-Americans, and honorable mention, there was a semantics game being played last week like I've not seen. So just to lay it out, the NWCA, which was formed back in the 20s, right around the same time the first NCAA wrestling tournament was held, announced these All-Americans. Now, even as an employee of the NWCA for 3 years full-time, and then now as a contractor, I still do some work for them. And as kind of a, ad hoc historian, archivist, so to speak, I've always been kind of tricky with what's an All-American. Like the junior colleges, their top 5 are All-Americans, but their top 8 are place winners. And then we get into that and, okay, what's the place winner? What's the All-American? That type of nuance. Now we've entered a new wave of nuance and asterisks, because we were talking about, okay, Spencer Lee loses his chance to become a 4-time national champion. What he does not now, apparently, is lose his chance of being a 4-time All-American, because if you look at your trophy that you get from the NCAA championships, I have to borrow one because I obviously never won one. It says your weight, it says the year, and it says your place. That trophy that you get handed on the podium at the NCAA championships does not say All-American. So you know what does? The plaque that you get from the National Wrestling Coaches Association. That is the body that actually names All-Americans. And again, I didn't know this till last week. So the NCAA doesn't name All-Americans. They declare a national champion and top 4 teams, and they award place winners. So now we're getting into the nuances of the semantics of, does it count or does it not count? Well, every school recognizes All-Americans in some way, shape, or form in every sport. So if it's the AP that determines the basketball first, second, and third team All-Americans and honor mention All-Americans, and the schools are hanging them on a banner, we don't have that in wrestling because we've earned our places. Well, we didn't have a chance to earn our places this year, Matt. So what does the NWCA coaches group do? Now, this is not Pat and Mike in the office in Manheim. This is the coaches groups. There are committees, like in Division III, it was Lonnie Morris. Division II, I think it's Jason Worthen. I think Troy Nickerson is one of the guys behind it in Division I in terms of who the chairs of these coaches groups are. They make the decisions to do this. So what they did in Division I, the top 8 seeds were named first team All-American. Then your blood rounders, your 9, 10, 11, 12 by seeding, they were second team All-American. Then 13 through 16, honorable mention. So they did not wrestle to a place, and the NWCA has typically said top 8, those are your All-Americans. Now, I come to find out they could have actually broken that formula at any time in the past, but it's been generally accepted. Top 8, you place, you're an All-American. So the question here is, should this have been done across those 3 divisions? How is it weighted? How is it treated? And what do you do? And, I'm looking at what do I do from a historical standpoint? How do I log this? How do I treat this? So it opens up a can of worms that it's kind of interesting. I never thought I would ever cross.
Yeah, I've thought about this, JB, but I haven't spent a lot of time. I have talked to a couple weeks ago when this started coming out in D2 and D3. I did talk to some of my friends at those levels, and the general consensus there was, hey, we need to honor these guys in some way. They didn't get to participate, they didn't get to compete, but we can't really erase the year. So what do we do? And I think every program and every athletic department wants positive recognition. We normally rely on what we do on the field or on the mat or wherever.
We have a competition to determine it. It's pretty easy. Boom, top 8, done.
But when it's taken and the way it was taken from you, I think you have to honor these athletes in some ways. And I guess it's up to them. I don't want to criticize someone that says they find meaning or value in this. I know where my position would probably be, but I don't want to minimize another person's position where they feel strongly yes, I want to recognize my athletes. I want to honor them as All-Americans because they earned it. They had positioned themselves, to achieve that accomplishment. So I don't want to take away from them if they feel strongly about it. I know where I would be, but I think anytime you can draw positive recognition to your program, to your athletic department in university, I think it's a positive thing. And if this is the only thing that we have to promote, we're not, what's the harm of it, JB? The more I thought about it and I looked at it, I'm like, what's the harm in this? I mean, all these athletes earned the right to the national tournament. They earned their seed. And yes, we can get into the semantics of, well, you wrestled to the podium, you wrestled to earn your right on the podium. Well, no one could wrestle. So what do you do?
Yeah, and this isn't everybody gets a medal either. Nobody gets a medal. This is. And again, that was one thing that I actually, again, before I actually knew how the process was done, was I was proud about wrestling. It's we don't name our All-Americans. We earn them. Well, guess we named them this time. And what it does, unfortunately, what it does eliminate is the opportunity. And we talked to David Bolyard last week about Eastern Michigan. It eliminates a guy like Sedarian Perry, who got on fire, was under 500, finds his place on the podium. I think somebody even brought up the fact, you can go back further in time. Well, go back to Mark Branch. What if this happens Mark Branch's freshman year? He's under 500. He's not even be an All-American, let alone a national champion. So, granted, a lot of those arguments are, in hindsight or they're kind of retrofitting history to the current situation. But you lose the upset factor. Bakersfield had a guy named Josh Loomer win the conference. He was under 500. What if he got hot and was another under 500 success story? Well, he didn't have a great season up until the Pac-12 tournament, so he loses that opportunity to wrestle his way up. Devin Kane at North Carolina a couple of years ago was a 32 seed and made it to the blood round. So that's a situation that again, under this, he makes it the blood round. Well, that's the top 12. He could have earned himself a second team All-American spot. So it's just interesting to look at it. And it's also interesting is how the 3 divisions did them independently. I was wondering if they were, Division 3 had 18 qualifiers. They did first, second, and third team. So first team was 8, and then they went 4 and 4. So, they've got that. And then they've got Division 2 went top 10 because they seeded 8, but they ranked 10. And I learned that from Jackie Paquette, who is the senior women's administrator at the University of Indianapolis. She filled me in on that. So each divisional coaching group decided how to do it. And Tom Brands is on record saying it was the right thing to do, University of Iowa. But what it does now is it kind of has to make us rewrite history a little bit, because what's the answer to the trivia question? How many schools have had 10 All-Americans in a season in Division 1?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Minnesota.
Now we have Iowa.
Yeah,
right?
Well, that question now has to change to the only school that's had 10 place winners. And it is semantics, but but it's no longer the same. They are longer one of the same.
Let me ask you this, JB. I know I've heard rumblings and conversations about maybe individuals or programs filing lawsuits to regain eligibility for their student athletes. Would this affect us? I don't think it would, but could a court say, no, you were already awarded an All-American status? So you competed, but then it's the semantics of
this hurts the case, though. I don't think this is the intent. I honestly don't believe that the Division I coaches group, and this is not Mike Moyer, Pat Tossi, and the group there in Mannheim that is the NWCA. It's a very small staff there. This is the coaches. This is the membership. This is the Division I group that decided this. So, they have representation and such. So this is not something that just, one guy made a decision to do. So now to that point about, man, I'm stealing your line again, Matt, to the point about trying to gain eligibility, because there is a group trying to raise awareness and try to get that extra year. Now, they lose the chance to become a 4-time national champion. Well, now does this, I guess, from a legal standpoint, provide finality to the season? No, you are an All-American, because again, like I said, your trophy doesn't say All-American. Your trophy has a place on it. So now does your argument change? Do you say, well, I lost the opportunity to be a 4-time place winner? Well, what's more important, the All-American or the place? So, I mean, and then on the bright side, let's look at what this did do. This gave Matthew Kolodzik, Princeton's first 4-time All-American. This gave David McFadden, Virginia Tech's first 4-time All-American. This gave, Neil Richards at VMI, the first All-American since Les Apido at Heavy. I mean, what it did was, my question is, okay, how far do you go? I mean, our first team, second team, I mean, the numbers are going to be off there. They're not going to be an even, 80 each year because of 2020, but we can look at the opportunity to spin this as a positive too, because there are programs that haven't had All-Americans on the podium in decades that are now getting one. Like Evan Cheek at Cleveland State, I think he was second team or honorable mention. So, Dan Carcelli's not the last trivia question answered. The thing is, who are we to tell those schools? Now, I can say, here are the placement. I have a finite and direct placement to say, no, these are the top 8 place winners. Oh, you were an All-American. Okay, awesome. That, I'm going to have to change how I do my preview guide. I'm going to have to change how I even make our calls. But I can tell you what, me and Brian Hazard are still going to call every single one of those guys that wins in the blood round All-American, no matter what. So, this has not been done. There has been some chatter about if they're going to look at this going forward. I don't think they should. I think they should go back to the way we did it when we get back to the way we do it. So, but there's the part of me that's the purist, like, yeah, we should earn it, but you can't just wipe away. We lost how many potential 4-time All-Americans? I mean, Taylor Lujan, I know it's not what he wanted. He didn't earn it on the mat, but the argument can be said, yeah, he did. He was the top seed. Yeah. And only 13 number 1 seeds have not placed since 1979. So I'd say you've got a really, really, really good chance of at least being on that podium as a top seed. Statistics are in your favor.
Yeah, I think so. And you know what? Who's to disagree with the thought leaders in our sport? I mean, these coaches that made these decisions, these are the leaders of our sport. And so if they feel like this is the best way to handle this situation, hey, get on board with it. I mean, it's whether you like it or not. I mean, everybody has an opinion, but I don't think this harms anything. And I think it probably does. It may not do much now, JB, but I think at some point in the future, I think all of these athletes will look back and say, I'm glad I was recognized. I'm glad, because the leaders in the sport, this wasn't intentional. They weren't doing anything out of ulterior motives. This was just happenstance. This isn't Central Florida declaring themselves, FBS national football champions. I mean, I think it was like nothing triggered this outside of this global epidemic, this global virus. So, I mean, I'm all for. I applaud these leaders for coming up with what they thought was the best solution in an imperfect situation. Right. Right. And again, yeah, this year's always going to be looked at a little differently. And yeah, if Spencer Lee goes 1-1, first team won,
That's your asterisk. That's going to be your 4-time asterisk. There are going to be those situations. Vincenzo Joseph loses the opportunity of being a 4-time finalist. There's few of them as well. So again, the placement nuance goes away. That's something that's up to the media folks to really kind of hammer out on how that's even projected and presented. So, we did lose that. We know that we can't make everything whole, but I do think that knowing how the process has worked, that just came to light. I mean, it's not like, again, the NCAA doesn't name an All-American team. It's the NWCA that's been doing it since 1928. So the fact that nobody knew that is, that's another talking point altogether, but it was put out there. It's the first time they've had to really let everybody know about it, because I mean, it's one of those things like, well, we don't need to make a big thing about it. No, we're doing it. They're not doing this to puff their chest out by any stretch of the imagination. But if they're the group that's been declaring the All-Americans, and that's what's happening this year, I mean, why should their policy of declaring All-Americans change just because there's no tournament? I realize that's a ridiculous statement to some, but nothing changed on their end except the fact that there was no tournament. Yeah. Times 3.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing to discuss, but I think for me, I think we get on board with the leaders of our sport. This is how they wanted to move forward. And so it's a good conversation piece, but yeah, I'm not going to split hairs over it. I don't feel so strongly one way or the other where I'm like, I'm going to plant my flag here and I'm going to stand by it and argue it till I'm blue in the face. It's, hey, imperfect situation, imperfect outcome. What are you going to do? They think they were doing the best when the best they possibly could in an imperfect situation.
And again, here's where the splitting hairs is going to come through. And again, this is not a pun at my head. The placements. So as I track this stuff with these databases I have, and you've got like different fields that you enter numbers. Some are characters, some are various characters, some are number fields. If anybody's familiar with Access or MySQL databases, you've got a different type of field. So right now it's been a 1 through 8, and actually it's been a very variable character field because I now have R12 and R8. So I track all those placements who have been a match away. Well, now I'm going to have to go through, and they're going to be first, second HM for Division 1, and first, second, third for Division 3, and then just first team. So it creates another dynamic of how placements are going to sort next year. When I put the preview guide, I'm like, this is going to be fun. But again, they're all Americans. They're going up on the wall. And if they still have a program like Killian Cardinale and Larry Early, if they had a wall to be put up on in Norfolk, they'd be on there at Old Dominion. So those are the situations. Now, next thing we move on to is another divisive topic. And I don't think the All-American topic is as divisive as, I mean, basically it's a couple people being loud and bloviating about how, I'll never recognize it. Well, screw you. It's the...
I think I was gonna say I want to add one more thing in this. Like, if we didn't recognize these guys at all, JB, is it in a way are we saying we're forgetting about this season, right?
Yeah.
If we don't recognize these guys at all, we're just saying, oh no, it's got to be the tried and true. If you didn't walk into that circle, get your hand raised 4 times before you stand on the podium, you didn't truly earn it. Well, on the flip side of that, we don't acknowledge this season at all. We don't acknowledge the magnificence of what the Hawkeyes were throughout the year and all the enjoyment we got. It goes away. It's just an asterisk in the books. At least we tried to do something. At least I would rather argue about something than talk about nothing.
That's a great way to look at it. And actually, that is actually kind of a natural progression into the trash talk topic, which we touched on, because there are people that, and I do fancy myself as a traditionalist, as a purist in some regard, but the celebration discussion, the trash talk discussion, those are not necessarily the same thing, but I actually got into it with some fans on Twitter about I think one of the kids in the PIAA did a cheesy little celebration. And then it's like, it sparked off some people, act like you've been there before. The kid what if the kid, maybe the kid hadn't been there before? It's one of those type of decisions. And then we get into the trash talk, which some of, again, are wrestling purists. And this is where I kind of go in the middle ground. I really don't have a strong opinion one way or the other. I can see both sides, but we get into what happened on Flow Wrestling Radio live last week. And in in case you missed it, but I don't think a lot of you did, because it was actually just looking at it from a Facebook Live situation. There are a lot of people watching that show as it happened. Well, Jordan Burroughs had seen that they were talking about the greatest wrestlers in weights of and he took exception to him not being folk style. I believe that's the narrative of it. And so Jordan got on Twitter, said something about it. Ben Askren and Christian Piles brought him on the show, and without unannounced, Mr. Askren, our good friend here at RUDIS, brought on Kyle Dake. So we had two of the most talented and dynamic wrestlers in American history. We can say that right now. Dake's got a couple of world titles. That's a very short list that can do that. And then they start jawing, and they get off task about what the actual argument was. And there were some interesting things. Now, first time I'm watching this, I'm at breakfast, and I've got my phone, and I usually typically, we're getting the kids, if I do listen live, it's not every day, but I'll sit there and I'll have it in, and I'm like, and I had the cereal, the kids, the coffee. I was trying to make my wife breakfast. I can't listen to this right now. And then I'm like, I got to know what's going on. And then I was just looking at it, and I'm just like, yeah, I'm cringing. And then I hang up. I was like, no, I got to know. I kept going back for more, Matt, because I didn't know what was going to be said. And again, I thought in my initial reaction was it came off, I don't want to say sad. It didn't feel genuine in some respects. But at the same time, I go back and listen to it a couple hours later, as a podcast, and I go, well, one, this wasn't too bad. And B, I can definitely see where people would blow this out of proportion. And then you go to social media, and then you see the responses that are mixed completely. So I don't know where the community lies on this, to be quite honest with you, because this is probably more of a divisive topic than the celebrations, and then, who's better, Iowa or Penn State. Those are the things that fracture our community.
Yeah, I mean, for me, there's a big distinction between celebrating and trash talking. I believe you've worked so hard for an entire year and for your lifetime to achieve a certain moment. And I think you should celebrate that, whatever that celebration is to you. I mean, a lot of people think it's a me-centric thing. Like, look at me, look at what I did. But a lot of the celebration is that there's an outlet. You finally get an outlet to let out the emotion that you've sat on for a year. Everything that you and your coaches had to deal with, your family had to deal with, your teammates had to deal with. I think I don't have a problem with celebrations. But when it comes to trash talk, and especially as it relates to the sport, and especially specifically with these two individuals, I've got a problem with it. I think it's commonplace in our society. Like, I heard a comment by Ben saying, hey, people want to hear people talk. Well, yeah, there's a difference between talking and attacking someone. And I think that's what trash talk is. If you want to have a conversation and talk about matching up with someone, I have no problem with that. But fundamentally, there's an element of trash talk that is attacking and trying to tear down your opponent. And the one thing that we have in our sport that makes us different is the respect for the process, the respect for what we all go in. How we silently suffer, how we silently sacrifice for our sport, and the respect we show when we step in those lines. We are going to try and kill each other, because that's the respect we owe as opponents to each other. I will give you my best effort. I will try and physically and mentally break you down inside that circle. The rules outside of how you score go out the window. Your job, if you truly respect someone, when you step in that circle, you will do everything in your power to physically and mentally break this person down. But once that match is over, what do? We shake hands, we look each other in the eye, and we're one of the few sports that goes over to the sideline and shakes the other coach's hand, right? And I think that's what makes our sport unique. And to bring it down to the masses, I think it's disrespecting the sport to say, well, hey, we want to be entertained. We want to be entertained. Well, if you want to be entertained, turn into the NFL, the NBA, or the MLB. These guys are paid professionals.
To that, though, is that where we're potentially losing that sponsorship dollar? We're losing we always talk about wanting to attract a casual fan, somebody that will flip on wrestling, stop and watch. Now, I have no problem with the respect angle. I know that's one thing that again, it's part of that traditionalist, that purist type of thing. But at the same point, the rise in popularity of the sport that's actually paying our wrestlers more than we ever could as a sport, mixed martial arts, whether it be Bellator, whether it be UFC, whether it be ONE, I think some of that stuff is way over the top. I think Conor McGregor and his press conferences are over the top. I think even some of the stuff Ben said's been kind of goofy. I think what pardon my language here, what Marty Usman is saying, because I always known him as Marty. I'm going to call him Marty. But, I think that's not him. Whereas Colby Covington, that is him. He's just a dirtbag. So you get a little bit of that. And I don't think there is, I think there's a line. I think we can show that there are general disagreements with athletes that will help draw fans to our events. Do I think Dake and Burroughs' discussion will help draw any more fans to our events? Probably not. But what it will do is it will get some secondary media attention from, say, the MMA and the fight bloggers. And you've got people that are big fans of professional wrestling, and they are making a ton of money when they're rolling. When we're not shut down, they're putting out pay-per-views, and they've got their own pay-per-view network. They've got sold out arenas and such. So they're putting on a show. It's entertainment. There's the line that, do we need to not necessarily blur the line, because I feel like there's professional wrestling and the writing behind it. Then there's our wrestling, which is, the purest side of it. And in between, we've got that melding of the athletes trying to beat the heck out of each other that isn't predetermined, and the theatrics of trash talk that goes with it. I think there can be healthy disagreements. I think there can be discussions. At some points, Burroughs and Dake did get into the technical and tactical discussions they have. Like the questions like, would you take down? Or, would you choose down? Or you can't, I'd have to take you down 3 times. And, that type of stuff, to me, that was super engaging. And that I don't know if even trash talk is the way to, because everything is put behind this trash talk bubble, but there were definitely some points in that argument. And that's what it was. It was an argument. And I can pick things out and be like, that's a good speaking point that would have been on ESPN. That's a good speaking point that would have been on ESPN. And then where I kind of lose interest is when we go into the nonsensical stuff, where people like say Ben, let's use Ben for an example, and his unfortunate incident in the Masvidal fight. So that next time he's in a fight, that's going to come up. Okay, yeah, we're going to beat that to death. Big deal. Okay, I kind of check out on that stuff. Let's talk about what you're going to do to win the fight versus making fun of his chin or making fun of his hair or making fun of his sandals on the red carpet. There are there's things to poke fun at that you can get a laugh. And then there's stuff to like the vindictiveness, and I'm not going to say that, we've got people in our sport that aren't super nice. We got to realize that too. That we've got dirtbags in our sport, just like we've got dirtbags in every sport. I don't feel their voice needs to be quelled, but at the same point, some of that stuff does turn me off. I don't think that there should be an absolutely no. I mean, it's like, we go back and look at Brent Metcalf, who, has that quote out there about, I don't celebrate because I don't want them to know that me beating them meant something to them or something like that. I believe that's the quote. But then you can look at a guy like Jake Herbert, who was so colorful and jovial that his trash talk wasn't trash talk. It was goofiness. He'd be like, Brent Metcalf was asked a question at a press conference that year at NCAAs. What'd you have for breakfast? Kyle Kleeman asked the question. And Brent was like, yeah, it was very, very like stern and, straightforward about, almost robotic. And Herbert's like, I had some eggs. I think I had some Eggos, Lego my Eggo. I was just making a joke out of it. So some of that comes with the personality, whereas Jordan Burroughs is extremely well-versed in media training. He has been since 2011, going through 2 Olympic Games. He knows his brand. He is not going to say anything that is going to be an moment that's going to cause him to lose sponsorship. Dake hasn't been on an Olympic team yet. He hasn't gone through the process of all the USOC training, but he's won 2 world championships, and he's been off the mat, and he's basically kind of been at Cornell, which doesn't have the media coverage that a school like Nebraska in the Big Ten does. So all those factors, I think, made Jordan come off a lot more polished and a lot more argument ready, even though it was kind of a gotcha. Whereas Dake, I think, was a little cringy at times. And some of the things, you can side with whoever you want. But ultimately, to get back to the initial point behind this rant, is I didn't have a whole lot of problem with the whole idea of them, talking to each other. It's just when the tearing down, I can see a line of poking fun, but I didn't, there's some lines in there like this. That probably wasn't a good thing to say. I don't think anything out of that whole conversation was sponsorship losing, but I do think there was some cringy moments that would even make Henry Cejudo smile.
Yeah, I think I'm all about promoting the sport. So don't take my dislike for trash talk to say we shouldn't promote the sport at all. I think we should promote it. And a guy like, case in point, a guy like Thomas Gilman, he speaks his mind very directly. You ask him a question, you're going to get an answer, whether you like it or not. But most of the time,
is the difference the genuineness behind it, though? Is it sometimes there are still some people that go, well, this seemed a little bit contrived at points, or is it because Gilman, you don't know what you're going to get? Jake Herbert, you don't know what you're going to get. Those type of characters, you're like, okay, let's sit back and
I think
there's a genuine factor there.
I think when someone like, I just speak my mind, and that's who I am, and I don't necessarily have much of a filter, and that is entertaining. As long as it doesn't cross the line and personally attack someone, that's kind of my line. Now, in other ways we can promote the sport. Hey, let's have the best wrestle the best all the time. Like if we really want to promote the sport and we believe it's exciting, you know what? I believe Penn State has done a ton to elevate the sport of wrestling, to make it more entertaining. Everybody is talking. We need to score points. We need bonus points. That's what makes the sport entertaining, right? You can talk all you want, but if you go out and wrestle a 3-2 match, you're going to say wrestling sucks. But, you can talk all you want. You go out and wrestle like a lot of the guys from Penn State, like David Taylor, Bo Nickel, Jason Off. That's fun to watch. I don't care if you even know what the sport of wrestling is about. You see a guy get after him like that, it's like, hey, I think I want to find out more about this sport. So instead of, promoting a false narrative, go show the greatness of the sport of wrestling when you can actually do it. Now, I know I'm getting off a little bit on a tangent there, and I'll loop it back in. The problem I guess I had with FRL is they took a subjective conversation that was meant to be somewhat lighthearted, but JB took it a bit seriously. He was like, no, I should be on this team. I want to talk about it, which was great. My problem was FRL, Flo brought him on a platform under a certain understanding. He was going to talk about being one of the all-time greats in folk style at 165. And then you bring in everybody. We know the backstory here. We know the storyline that we didn't get to talk about from 2 weeks ago. My thing is, especially when it comes to Jordan Burroughs, this is one of the greatest wrestlers ever. Outside of John W., this, in my book, is the number 2 guy. And I thought it was extremely disrespectful for Flow Wrestling to bring him on and basically blindside him, from a guy who was definitely prepared to have this conversation. JB was prepared to have the 165 conversation. Kyle Dake was coming on with an agenda, and it quickly turned into that. And I thought it was extremely disrespectful to do that to one of our all-time greats ever. That he deserves more respect than that. Outside of, no, should we be entertained? And that's what Kyle Dake said afterward. Do you not want to be entertained? No, not when it comes at the sake of disrespecting one of our all-time greats. I have a big time problem with that. To say that, no, FRL, Flow is out there just, to basically be a TMZ platform and talk about whatever they want, however they want. No, you honor and respect the people that go before us. They're not entertainment commodities. They're not here for our consumption just because we're locked in quarantine. Oh, let's put JB on here and be entertained and poke fun of him and basically disrespect what he's done for the last 10 years in our sport.
I mean, I could definitely see that side of it. I think that may be more of an extreme the intent. I don't think that was the intent initially. And, but then again, we've got athletes that you can clearly say, okay, there's probably a respect there, but there's also, it can tell when we got to the point where we could see there was a genuine, like, I don't like you. You're good, but I don't like you. And I'm coming for your spot. Well, I don't like you. And I've beaten you 6 out of 7 times, or what is it? 7 out of 8, whatever it is. So there is that rivalry. They've got the same thing in mind. One's been there and been on the top of the mountain. The other one's got a couple world titles. So I can understand the uneasiness in their lack of, a friendship. But when we look at the entertainment value on it, we had guys like Reese Humphrey, Jacob Kasper. We had a bunch of wrestlers out there promote. I was like, yeah, this was great. And then, there are people that were, even some of the greats. I think Cormier liked it too. I'm not quite sure. I don't want to put words in his mouth without actually knowing for sure. But there was a real split from an athlete standpoint on what they thought of it. So, guys like Jacob Kasper have been basically they're ready to go through the WWE training once they get through the trials process. So the question is where do we draw the line? Was it disrespectful? I think you're going to have people that agree with you there. Was it nothing? I think you're going to have people agree with you there. Was it cringy? I think you're going to have people agree with you there. So I really, again, I'm non-committal on the disrespect thing. I wasn't, it didn't turn me off, but it didn't really make me get all happy and crazy. Like, oh man, these are good. This is going to be great. So, I mean, again, I try to look at it with an unbiased eye in terms of, because again, I don't have any favorites in this regard. I want to see Team USA win, whoever that is, when we get to Tokyo. That's who we're pulling for. But ultimately, the only thing I think maybe that did bother me was the unexpected thing. It's like, okay, well, one person clearly knew they were coming on where the other didn't. And I think that's where, again, Jordan's media training and his wife Lauren's a journalist. There's situations, they've got some training where a different athlete would have handled that 100% differently, in my opinion. And kudos to Jordan Burroughs for keeping his composure for the most part on that. He didn't get, there's a jab here and there, and he tried to get some words in. But back to the respect thing, again, I appreciate that viewpoint. I don't know if I'm going to subscribe to it entirely, but I do think there are different ways that that respect word does get thrown around. So we've got to make sure we almost have to define what some of these words are. Like, just because you're jawing doesn't mean you're trash talking. Just because you're celebrating doesn't mean you're disrespecting your opponent. So again, we boil this down to a very nuanced type of perspective. And ultimately, who makes the decision, Matt? Who gets to make the decision? It's the consumer. It's the wrestling fan. If they're turned off by Kyle Dake, they're going to root for Jordan Burroughs. If they're turned off by Jordan Burroughs, they're going to root for Kyle Dake. So in some respect, the disrespect part of it has gained fans for the other athletes. So there is a way for, even if you felt disrespected, that the other athletes can actually gain some respect from the fan bases who were not appreciative of it. So, in some cases you can look at this as a win-win too. Yeah.
I mean, I can agree with everything you're saying, and I'm not just cut and dry, like so bound to this one side or the other that I can't listen to reason. But,
get off my lawn, Dernlan. Get off my lawn.
Yeah, but I think in this situation, we throw about the respecting out a lot. And I guess it would be one thing if both guys knew the rules of engagement and both agreed and say, okay, yeah, I'll jump on Flo and talk about this. But when one person agrees to a certain context to the podcast, to the interview, and then gets introduced to a completely different reality, like, that's definitely disrespectful. So yeah, I know where my position is as far as I do think we need to promote the sport. I'm not an advocate for trash talking or breaking someone down. But if they agreed to do it, if there was a setting where both sides, I'll get on and talk about
if we come up with a roast where one athlete, take your best shot. I mean, if it's something like, but again, also that's a situation where, I've been in media in wrestling for over 20 some years. So, and people know that I've actually kind of made my suggestions on certain outlets, whether they be what Intermat does right now, or what the Wrestling Mall used to do, or what Flo does right now, or what I was doing at themat.com or Wrestling 411 or whoever else I've worked for. Those type of suggestions, oh yeah, they're great, but it's their decision. They got great traffic out of it. They got great metrics out of it. They got great footage out of it to promote the trials moving forward too. So they also had an opportunity to build a backstory to that rivalry too. So you can fault them for the disrespect, but there's also a business aspect to it that I don't know if that was the intent, but it definitely, when you look at it and boil it down, be like, well, yeah, we can definitely capitalize on this. So again, I'm not going to tell anybody to how to run their business, because I've done it for years and it gets me no results. So I've stopped trying. If they want to ask for advice, I'm all for it. I'm not necessarily going to push my agenda on anybody anymore. But that's just, again, that's what they want to do, and there was some definite entertainment value to it, because
sure, some
people were entertained, some people were turned off. Like I said, I kept going back to it. At one point when I said, I can't listen to this, and I turn it back on. It's like Howard. It's like, in the movie Private Parts, where they talk about Howard Stern. Why do you listen to Stern? I like him. Why do you listen to Stern if you hate him? I'm going to hear what he says next. What's the most common answer? Well, I want to see what he's going to say next. I think that's kind of what we had on that day on FRL. And I'll be completely honest. I was more entertained on the re-listen than I was actually live, probably because I could digest it and I had a chance to look at it. But, we're going to see elements of MMA and pro wrestling come into our world, and some of our generation are going to be all for it. Some of them are not going to be for it. I mean, I'm in the middle there. I'm 40. I kind of grew up with pro wrestling. I don't watch a whole lot of MMA. I'm turned off by some of the schlock that some of the MMA world throws at you. But some people love that stuff and they'll consume it all. And they'll read all these spoof accounts of, how many fake accounts does Ariel Helwani have? I mean, we'll see any type of anything Conor McGregor says, and just it becomes a meme. So I mean, like I said, I'm indifferent. I can see all your points. I don't necessarily subscribe to all of them, but that's this is our platform to talk about it. So we are doing that.
Yeah, and I mean, to get off of this tangent, the only thing I'll just wrap this up by saying, you know what? I think there's so many positive things in sports in general. Just competing, there's so many positive narratives to discuss in sports in general. The pursuit of excellence, the standards of excellence that you're trying to achieve, all those things. I think the trash talk, the element of trash talk, it's a negative term that everybody tries to. Mm-hmm. It's an easy thing to do. We see it in the news. We see it in journalism. We see it with athletes on athletes. Like, the easiest thing to do is tear somebody down. And yeah, I think that's an easy sell. But there's positive things to sell. You just have to look for them a little bit harder and promote them a little bit better. But I think I'm of the ilk, like, if you can positively promote something to gain positive notoriety, do that. Don't turn into what could be the worst possible outcome here. I want to see that. Anyway, that's just my 2 cents.
The last two examples, and these just popped into my head. I don't even know if they're apt. They're just things that popped into my head. So let's look at Daniel Cormier, who, for all everything we know about Daniel, great guy, does the right things, does things the right way, doesn't fail drug tests, coaches high school, one of the greats when we talk about mixed martial arts. Then we talk about who is his top antagonist is a guy named John Jones, another wrestler who's got a checkered past. He doesn't seem to do anything right. He wrecks his car into pregnant women's cars. He's on the, he's all sorts of, who knows what he's doing with the performance enhancing or whatever you want to call it. That's all the drug issues and stuff, and the trash talk. Who's the bigger draw at the gate? The nice guy who does it the right way, or the trash talking guy who's doing blow? I mean, that's the society we're dealing with too. I mean, like, yeah. It's all nice and good to be, oh yeah, that's nice. Why was Kurt Angle reviled? Why was his heel turn so great in the WWE when he was trying the 3 eyes? Because it was this goody two shoes crap that some people don't like. The reality is, those people draw, and if we I'm not saying we should bring that in. I'm saying, but if there's stuff that germinates organically within the sport of wrestling, and it's a genuine dislike, and there's some jawing, okay, genuine, legitimate heat, to borrow pro wrestling terms. So I don't think there's a huge problem with that. Now, when it gets out of line, we're at a press conference face off, and we've got shenanigans happening, like with Jones and Cormier and things like that. That's where No, we don't need that. But I don't think people are showing up to watch wrestling. I mean, would new fans show up to watch wrestling and be like, oh, wow, that was a great tactically executed match with the guy that's just, walks off the mat, shakes his hand? I mean, the difference is Steve Mocco, for example, blistering off the mat after he wins or loses. Well, mostly wins. And it's just like, I was like, that guy's mean. I want that guy. That guy doesn't give interviews and he's scary. I think it's the personality. Again, it's the eye of the consumer and ultimately the dollar. So again, being nice and respectful is great. That's what our sport teaches. But people aren't always wired that way, and people are going to like what they like. And, I'm sitting there watching Ozark. That is a train wreck of a show. Like, I haven't watched Tiger King yet, but, you find yourself rooting for the bad guy in Ozark. You find rooting yourself for the bad guy in Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad and shows like that. So, I mean, our generation is rooting for bad guys all the time, and that's what's making money.
Yeah. Interesting conversation, regardless.
I didn't know how Ozark was going to make itself into the show here. That might be a record. Other than I finally finished it, and no spoiler alert. I wasn't impressed with it as far as the ending goes. But anyway, that's just season 3. Matt, anything else you got as we prep up? I know you've got Moyer coming up. You recorded that today. Also, we're going to start working on our 90th anniversary teams. Matt and I are definitely going to have to put together the last 15 years of wrestling. And now, guess what? We can add 2020 because we have All-Americans to consider.
There we go. Thanks, JB.
All right. So for Matt Dernlan, I'm Jason Bryant. This has been episode 151 of the RUDIS Wrestling Podcast.